all the way down. We finally made it to the end. After a long, well, not too long of a season, we conclude with maybe one of the most interesting and complicated plots of a Futurama episode in a long time. Most of these other episodes I only had to watch once or twice to write the reviews, but this one took me a whole 4 watches. It was a theme at the start of the season where each episode would flip-flop from being good to being bad. Then we got a string of good episodes, then a string of bad episodes. A lot of people have been chalking this entire season up as bad, and while this season certainly isn't good, I would say it's just worse than any Futurama season before it. Slightly above average television, but bad Futurama. Inconsistent might be the best word to describe this season up until its finale. This final episode had no room to fail though, with the entire season leading up to it, everyone anticipating a good ending, and the episode tackling more philosophical themes than they have in a while. The bar was high. Godfellas, the late Philip J. Fry, and The Prisoner of Benda, being great philosophical episodes in the past. A precedent was definitely in place. Did this episode meet the high mark that was set for it? This synopsis and review of the new Futurama episode will contain spoilers, so if you haven't watched it yet, go do that, then come back. The professor is ecstatic. He did it. What did he do, everyone asks? He created a simulation of the universe operating in the office of Planet Express. He has everything honed in on the simulated Planet Express, where we see little pixel versions of the Planet Express crew. Everything in this universe is operating at a low resolution and bitrate, or normal resolution and bitrate if you use Spectrum. We get to watch Fry and Leela make a delivery to Space Italy, then go on a date after Bender gets himself arrested. After watching the simulation for a while, the question is asked, do they know that they are in a simulation? Well, of course not, the professor responds. If that's the case, then how do we know that we're not in a simulation? The question is pondered for a little bit, and at the end, Professor Farnsworth concedes that it is possible. This affects no one more than Bender. Bender, as an artificial intelligence, is a simulated life form in a way, so he's taken a liking to the simulated Planet Express crew. The professor decides to unplug the simulation, and this upsets Bender. He makes the professor promise that since he brought those lives into the world, that he will take care of them, and make sure they're able to live them out even though they aren't technically real. The professor comes up with an idea to help run things better. They can find a new source of electricity from the fumes in the old sewer system to help them power the simulation. They drill through the earth and tap into it, and it makes the simulation run at the same quality as Earth. Over the course of the episode, the simulation has grown to do the same things that the Planet Express crew has done throughout the season. It all comes to a head when they build a simulation of their own. They ask the same question that the original Planet Express crew did at the beginning of the episode. Are we a simulation? The main difference being they end up caring about finding out the answer to this question more so than the original crew. As the simulation within a simulation glitches out because 2 black holes are spawned within one another, they come up with a plan. If they make a magnetic star collapse, that would require so much energy to simulate that they would glitch out, proving that they are in a simulation. Bender is upset that they are going to find out, and he decides that he wants to be the one to break the bad news to them. So the professor takes Bender's programming and puts it in the simulated Bender. The catch is, there's no way of knowing for sure if he'll be able to return. There's a good chance that what's about to happen will crash the simulation, and possibly kill Bender as he's inside it. As Bender is inside the simulation, he listens to everyone speak, and they come to terms with the fact that they might be in a simulation. If they find out that they're in a simulation, it won't bother them, so Bender decides not to say anything. At the real Planet Express headquarters, everything is catching on fire. This becomes an even greater concern when the professor reminds everyone that he has the equivalent of thousands of nuclear bombs in the building. It was all too much for the simulation. They needed to come up with a solution and fast. In the end, Bender reboots and doesn't die. The professor finds a way to underclock the simulation, so everything in that world will occur slowly, while nobody in it notices a difference. And the simulated Fry and Leela embrace each other as they realize they are in a simulation. Personally, I was pretty happy with how this episode turned out. It didn't fall into any of the pitfalls that would have made me hate it. I was so worried this episode would be chock full of meta humor. Hey Bender, we could be in a simulation. Imagine if there were 11 seasons of us on television. What if there were people watching us, Bender? This episode took its premise as seriously as it should have, and they didn't do anything like that. The humor present in the episode was pretty good as well. There were several good one-liners. Futurama is pretty good about keeping emotional episodes serious when they need to be, but also including a good amount of humor. The characters do a pretty good job at exploring the themes presented to them, and all around, the writing was great. This was a strong episode for Bender, with him being the one to bear the weight of the situation, and the writers did a pretty good job with this. Fry and Leela in the simulation helped give the episode a semblance of stakes. A simulation crashing wasn't enough to captivate me, but it was a smart idea to expand on Fry and Leela's relationship in the simulation, so I'd feel like at least something would be lost if everything went offline. Other than the low stakes, the pacing was a bit off, and one of the major plot points was just a toilet joke. Overall, it was still a really solid episode. I'd go as far to say it was great. I'd give it about a 9 out of 10. But Futurama has had 10 out of 10 episodes, and we did not have any this season. I can list about 10 episodes in the Fox era alone that were better than this episode by a long shot, and this was the best episode of the season. I've seen some hate for this finale, and even though it's a good episode, I get why. As great as it was, it marks the end of a subpar season, which doesn't quite justify its undoing of the perfect ending it got over 10 years ago. I think the episode had to be nearly flawless to live up to the expectations that it naturally had, and I'll be honest, I don't even blame the fans in this scenario. And as promised, here is a ranking of every episode this season. In last place, Rage Against the Vaccine. screen. The subject matter made it hard for me to enjoy this episode in the first place, but the bad plot and awkward character interactions made it just awful. In 9th place, The Prince and the Product. Just a bad anthology episode. Making something intentionally bad doesn't make it good. Even Johnny Two Chells thought it was bad. He's a good critic, but he's too nice to a couple of shows, Futurama included. In 8th, How the West Was 1010001. I didn't really hate all the crypto stuff, just the interactions between Hermes and Dwight, and Fry and Leela. It's season 11, they pretty much got engaged at the end of season 10. Can we stop having Leela messing around with other guys? In 7th, Zap gets cancelled. They somehow made this episode lean into its sci-fi themes more than most episodes this season, but when it came to plot hooks, they forgot that everything was happening in a different setting and gave us the most sterile Family Guy story you could imagine. In 6th place, we have The Impossible Stream. I get that it's an ongoing joke for Futurama to reference the fact that they were cancelled every time they come back, but that was this episode's defining trait, a reused joke. In 5th, Parasites Regained. This was the only episode this season that soured for me upon a second viewing. I gave this episode a good review initially, but after sitting through it again, the Dune stuff is played into way too heavily, and I really hate how they took away the emotional goodbye at the end of this episode. In 4th, the first good episode of this ranking, I Know What You Did Next Xmas. I liked the Zoidberg and Bender pairing, and it was a fun episode. It really only had minor flaws such as weaker pacing. I would say 2nd and 3rd place are a tie for me. Children of a Lesser Bog, its character moments between Leela, Amy, and Kith, making for an emotional story, while related to items you viewed, was just a pretty funny episode, with Mom being a funny villain as always, not to mention the nice moments with Fry and Leela moving in together. I can't really pick one over the other after rewatching both of them, so I'll leave it up to a poll in the community tab. And if you've been watching this video, you've already guessed it, all the way down. While it doesn't match the quality of season finales from the past, like The Devil's Hands or Idle Playthings, it does its job just fine. It's not the first Futurama episode to use existentialism to hit its emotional beats, but it does it quite well. Some might say they were playing it safe, but they put a pretty unique twist on the classic sci-fi theme covered. I think this is also the only episode of the season where the writing stayed true to all of the characters. Ultimately, the stakes feel kind of low, but that's really the only thing about it that annoyed me. As a whole, the season was like a 7 out of 10. I don't regret the 3 or 4 hours I spent watching it, or the additional 70 to 80 I spent making these reviews, but it's also not as good as it should have been, considering how it rewrote the show's legacy, and it certainly wasn't anything to write home about. I will be making videos that aren't about Futurama for the time being, but don't worry, I'll post an update video sometime between now and the next season, and I'll review those episodes when they come out too. I'll also try to make a retrospective video on a classic Futurama episode. Most of my videos are on new Futurama, so that should be interesting for you guys. Check out this video here, and I'll see y'all later.